It's a horrific case, obviously. I mean, three women, two, sisters, a mother, massacred in their home.
A BBC correspondent arrives home to find a tragedy. His wife and two daughters murdered.
People know him. They relate to seeing him, to watching him, to listening to him, and then to be involved in something like this, I'm sure is traumatic for the entire country.
What follows is an overnight manhunt as investigators search for the accused killer who's armed with a crossbow.
The horrific nature of these offenses, the brutal murder of these three women, sort of indicates some sort of crime of passion.
The case takes place in the town of Bushey, Hertfordshire, England, about 20 miles northwest of London. On Tuesday, John Hunt, a BBC 5 live race commentator, was working late at the Lingfield Park racecourse. The track is about an hour and a half from Hunt's house, so he arrived home later that evening at about 7 o'clock. But he was greeted with a gruesome scene. His wife and two daughters were badly injured, and officials now say they were the subject of a crossbow attack. I asked criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matt Mangino about this.
Yeah, I think, Sierra, as much as we would want to, you know, wonder how we would react, I think it's beyond our comprehension to come into your home and find your wife and your daughters mortally wounded. I can't imagine how you would react in a situation like that. It's truly appalling that someone would, come home from work, walk into their home and find that. It's so sad, and you just wonder, how you rebound from something like that, if you ever can. And I doubt that you can. And I think because he was well known through the BBC and his work there, this is something that touches the entire UK. I mean, people know him. They relate to seeing him, to watching him, to listening to him, and then to be involved in something like this, I'm sure is traumatic for the entire country.
Emergency responders were called to the scene right away, but 61-year-old Carol Hunt, 28-year-old Hannah Hunt, and 25-year-old Louise Hunt were later pronounced dead. It wasn't long before investigators zeroed in on a suspect, 26-year-old Kyle Clifford, who has a past connection with the Hunt family. What's going through my mind as we're learning the details is that the suspect allegedly dated one of the daughters and they had a breakup, so no longer together. I'm wondering if their breakup could have been a motive that led to this. Does their relationship factor into the murders?
Well, at this point, we're surmising what might have happened, but certainly, anytime an incident like this occurs, a terrible, horrendous incident like this, the first people that you're going to look at are the people who are closest to the victims. Sometimes, and we know it's not the case here, but sometimes the first person you look at is the husband, or you look at, in this case, boyfriends or other acquaintances. It's typically people at first instance that have some relationship to these individuals. As we heard in press conferences, the local police, the inspectors, has said that this is a targeted incident. Okay, so when it's a targeted incident, there's a reason why, it's not a good reason, certainly not a justified reason, but there's some reason why these people were targeted. These victims were targeted. The other thing is, when you look at something like this, and again, we're just going by news reports, the horrific nature of these offenses, the brutal murder of these three women, sort of indicates some sort of crime of passion. If it was a robbery that went awry, I mean, people certainly get killed in a robbery, but it's normally not some sort of repetitive conduct, some horrendous beating. It's, hey, I want to get out of here, and I don't want to be identified, and then I've killed these people. But it's not the brutal murders that you typically find when there's some sort of passion, some sort of relationship that's involved.
Investigators quickly determined that all three women were attacked with a crossbow. They also say the women were tied up before they were shot and that the attack could have involved other weapons. Going off what you're talking about, a potential crime of passion, that also went off through my brain when I learned that investigators believe he used a crossbow to kill these three women, which to me is something that stands out. I haven't covered many cases where a crossbow
Mhm.
is the weapon used. So that to me seems like it's even more intimate because when the husband arrived home, the three women were still alive and later died. It's not like a gunshot wound where they instantly died. So do you think his choice of weapon also fueled into that crime of passion theory?
Well, it could, but the thing I think is interesting here, and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, internationally, but we know that the UK, has limits on access to firearms, much more so, by any stretch of the imagination as compared to the United States, so in just some brief research, I see where crossbows have been used uh, to the extent in the UK where they have what I believe is the Crossbow Act of 1987 that says that if you have in your possession a crossbow, that you could be sentenced, up to multiple years in jail. So I think because firearms are so inaccessible in the UK, other forms of weapons, like a crossbow, is typically something that someone would have access to, and then ultimately is used in a homicide in this instance, and in other cases as well.
Almost right away, English officials start the investigation into the triple homicide and the search for Clifford. What are the first steps that investigators are going to be doing when they come and find three women who have been killed?
Well, the first thing that you're going to do is get to work with regard to forensics. You're going to want to try to see if there's anything there that you can salvage in terms of evidence of who might have committed this offense. The second thing immediately is to begin canvassing the neighborhood. What did people see? What did people hear? In this day and age, going right along with that is the closed circuit television, the surveillance cameras that might be in storefronts or other homes, even traffic devices. And you're going to want to, quickly try to get as much video as you can so you can look at the period of time before and after when you believe this incident occurred. So, those first few minutes are extremely important in terms of canvassing and getting as much information that you possibly can about anybody in that vicinity or going in and out of that home or any suspicious persons in the area. So that's where I would start immediately.
So that's just what investigators do, use neighborhood security footage to follow Clifford's steps in the moments after allegedly committing the murders. What follows is an overnight manhunt that drags on for hours as investigators work to zero in on Clifford's location. I asked Mangino what this kind of manhunt could look like.
Well, I think what you're going to do is pull together the most personnel, man and woman power that you can to begin, going and looking for this, potential suspect. So you're going to go to people that he knew. And you're going to ask, where did he frequent? What did he typically do? So you can begin to try to track him down. You want to know what kind of vehicle he operated, where he had any friends or relatives, maybe outside of the London or suburban London area, and really begin to focus in on, where you might find this person.
During this time, English investigators tell anyone who comes in contact with Clifford to call 999, their equivalent to 911. Investigators tell the public Clifford is likely armed with the crossbow he used to kill the Hunt women.
I think one of the things that they're going to be most concerned about is this is an armed and dangerous person. This is a person who just murdered three people, who's armed with a crossbow. And a crossbow, as I understand, is something that can be used in sort of an intimate situation. So somebody confronts him. It's not like a bow that we think of that a hunter might use, where he pulls back and you have a lot more range and power. This is something you can use in close contact. So they're going to be concerned to anybody who confronts him, if he feels threatened in some way, that he might harm other people or might harm the police. So I think that's priority number one.
During this time, there's concern Clifford may try to flee the area or even the country. But as Mangino points out, investigators would inevitably catch up with him.
I think that the police in the UK, as they are in the United States, are very well trained. They've done investigations and manhunts in the past. They know how these operations work, and really, when you have a team of maybe hundreds of law enforcement officers and investigators looking for you, it's inevitable they're going to find you. It's inevitable. You're not getting away, in the back of a truck. You're not getting on a plane and leaving the country. It doesn't happen any longer. Occasionally there are situations where people may evade uh, arrest for a period of time, but it's hard to point to a case where there's been a massive manhunt that I'm aware of in recent time where that person hasn't ultimately been apprehended.
About 24 hours after the murders took place, English first responders found Clifford about 30 minutes from the crime scene in Enfield, England. He was found in a cemetery there and treated for injuries, though it's still unclear how Clifford was injured, as the Hertfordshire police say officers didn't fire any shots. What do you think surrounding this arrest? Do you think that he's going to come out right away with a confession? He's going to deny it? What do you expect?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I mean, as I understand that he was arrested in a cemetery near where the crimes were committed, and that he was injured. So I don't know if those injuries were the result of his apprehension or if he was trying to harm himself in some way. But he has been arrested, and so there's a couple of issues here. One, he fled. That's always indicative of someone who's committed a crime. When you flee, you're sort of acknowledging your responsibility. And here, if he's trying to hurt himself, obviously he knows that he did something really bad. Whether he'll confess is a whole different story. Whether he's physically in condition to confess, I don't know how serious his injuries are, or even to be interviewed. That remains to be seen.
From here, Mangino expects the case to move through the UK justice system similarly to how the case would be handled in America, with one notable exception.
You're going to have some sort of preliminary court appearance where they're going to make some determination whether or not you're going to be detained. And then, the process starts, first with, determining whether there's sufficient evidence for this case to go forward, and then ultimately to trial. The UK doesn't have a death penalty. So their sentencing scheme is going to be different, certainly, than in the United States. This is a classic kind of case where, three homicides, there would be aggravating circumstances depending on the state. This could be a death penalty case, but that's certainly not the case in the UK.
Is there any sort of defense you could think of for the suspect if he is facing these three homicide charges?
Well, again, in the U.S., in a lot of states, we have statutes with regard to heat of passion. Okay, if the death, although premeditated, was because of some passionate matter that had happened. So here we have maybe a breakup between the perpetrator and one of the victims. I don't think that going into a house, and as some of the news reports that I've read, staying there maybe for hours and holding these women hostage is not the kind of case that would be a heat of passion case. If anything, that shows more planning, more premeditation in terms of his conduct.
There are still many unanswered questions in this case, namely, why was the crime committed in the first place? Do you think investigators then would be looking more seriously at what a motive could have been or whether this was premeditated, that he planned out these three murders?
Well, I certainly think that they're going to be interested in why this occurred. Okay. A motive is not required to be proven in courts in the U.S. and I'm sure it's similar in the U.K. Again, I'm not an expert on UK law, but you don't have to necessarily prove why somebody did something. You just have to prove, for instance, the United States for first degree murder, that someone used a weapon on a vital part of the body, knowing that that weapon would cause their death. And that's really what you need in terms of first degree murder. We talk about premeditated and things like that. You can premeditate something in the snap of a finger. It just takes a second to make that decision. I'm going to use this weapon on this person on a vital part of their body, and I know it can cause their death. That is premeditation.
Right now, Kyle Clifford is being treated at a major trauma center for injuries, but we're still unclear how he got hurt. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Gillespie.